am looking forward to diving into your albums, your latest album, your work. So thank you so much for taking a minute out.
It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get into live at Birdland, I want to know this. 5 years ago, this pandemic was changing so many things for all of us. How did you get through that era, and how has it shaped or changed the way that you approach things today?
Well, you go, Conal. I'll save my response for a minute, unless you
Well,
want to go first.
I don't mind. Yeah. I mean, personally, I got through the pandemic doing a lot of practice. I spent a lot of time at the piano, and it was the going to music always helps me in any kind of crisis and in good times too. I tend to go to music, go to the practice, the piano, whatever. And this was certainly a situation where I was able to do that. And we had I'm going to use the word luxury of time, although it was obviously for terrible reasons, but we all as musicians had all this time on our hands that normally we don't. And so I got through the awful kind of fear that came along with not knowing when we were ever going to work again and not knowing what the world was going to look like, afterwards. I got through all of that with a bubble of friends and my beautiful wife and playing and practicing hours and hours of music at home. So that's my personal getting through the thing. And then in terms of our band, if that's also what you're asking,
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to let Simon interject because Simon kind of had some bands going through the pandemic. Simon, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah. Well, and also it's interesting to point out that up until that time, we were playing at the Carlisle with Woody Allen, and that had been a regular gig for 25 years or so for all of us, or for Conal and I certainly. And so that ended at the pandemic, at the start of the pandemic. That was kind of a shock, just in terms of such a long running gig being no more. So as for my situation, I assembled a bunch of guys, and we played in the park almost every day during the pandemic in Central Park, and it was a big success. And a few other bands, when we started doing it, quite a few other people kind of got the idea and started doing it too. But we were pretty much the first, and we played in an area of the park known as Seneca Village. And called ourselves the Seneca Serenaders, which a name which we still bandy about a little bit. And it was really a great way to work on a repertoire and keep a regular playing schedule. And there were a few other places still going in New York City where the owners, were not cowed by the the fears that were generated by the pandemic, and we all had took turns in playing in those kinds of places. But yeah, so that's pretty much how I got through it.
So how did you hook up? How did you two come together and form this band? What were the beginnings of the High Society New Orleans Jazz Band?
Well, we both had an association with Eddie Davis, who was a banjo player and also the music director of Woody Allen's band. But we were both associated with him before that also. So we met, Conal and I met through our association with Eddie Davis, which then turned into a long-time membership in the Woody Allen's band. And so that's how it happened.
So talk to me a little bit about the chemistry, your guys' chemistry, how that's radiated out into the band. What's been kind of the key to this creative juice, this longevity?
Well, for myself, it's a uh, fundamentally, I think it's, can't tell me if you don't agree, but fundamentally, I think it's an agreement on foundational music principles that are exemplified by the early New Orleans music. Um, and and the key bands that were involved in that in the exploration of those fundamentals, whether they were in Chicago or whether they were still in New Orleans, or whether they even ever left New Orleans, as quite a few didn't, you know. So um, I think that's the key to the longevity of the chemistry, such as it is. And then there's repertoire, there's all kinds of other things that come into play. And I'll let Conal speak to some of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 100% agree with what Simon said, and I think in addition, on a practical level, because we're based in the New York City area, or what we call the tri-state area, we're able to work a lot together. And we had a steady gig for, I think Simon did 30 years at the Carlisle. I did about 28. So, and that's every week with Simon and I and the other members are getting together and playing all this great music in this particular style every single week for, virtually 30 years. And then other gigs that are in our little domestic scene here, because we're all the members of the current um, band and previous bands have been freelance musicians who play in all kinds of situations. So I mean, I'm running into Simon on other gigs as well as in with this band. So that's another major part of this longevity and success, if I may call it, is that we've done thousands of gigs together. We've been on the road together. I mean, we're good friends as well, on and off the bandstand, and all this adds to the chemistry of the group when we play, the longevity, our desires to keep going, because we're having a great time as well. So we find a way to keep going.
Take me back to your beginnings, each respectively. How did music, jazz, the New Orleans flavor, how did these seeds get sown and evolve into this love of it that's become your career?
Hmm. For me, it was uh, my family was a musical family. My mother was quite an accomplished pianist, and we all studied music and went to church, as a family, and sung in church and all that kind of childhood. But I was struck by hearing Louis Armstrong for the first time as a child, really, and although I was studying piano by that stage, I really wanted to try my hand at the trumpet. And so eventually I did. And at the time, in the city I grew up in, which is Melbourne in Australia, there was actually a traditional jazz scene, and there were competing factions within that scene. There were people who worshipped Bix Beiderbecke and people who worshipped King Oliver, and sometimes things came to blows. It was quite a quite an interesting situation. And then rock and roll came in, of course, and that added another piece of the pie. But it was always that was how I got started. And at high school, what we call high school here, in my case, was like a military school, and jazz was very much frowned on, which made it all the more attractive, of course, to the students. And we formed jazz bands and practiced in the music school and got threatened with expulsion for doing that and things like that. So that was my beginnings. And then, of course, once you once you actually perform it and you get to play with more experienced players, the growth really accelerates, and the love for the art form expands, and it never stops. That's my experience with it anyway.
Yeah, and for me, my parents, I have to say, it all comes from my parents. Neither one were professional musicians, but they're both huge music lovers and appreciators of music. My dad does play, or did more to an amateur level. So he used to play enough to play in a local pub kind of thing. Huge jazz fans, both of them. Although they loved all kinds of music. So my family home was filled with music. My mother, well, both of them, but my mother was particularly into radio. She was from that generation that was more into the radio than the TV. So the radio was always on, and it was always some, good quality uh, shows with the BBC, and full of music. So my dad started me on piano because he already played somewhat, and he saw Louis Armstrong and the All Stars. He was big into the Eddie Condon New York kind of Dixieland style as a teenager, and he when he was of university age, I would say, or maybe a bit early, he got into more of the current scene, which was, Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, Miles Davis. He saw all these bands live as a very young man in England. And so well, for as long as I've known it, it wasn't like there was a moment that he introduced me to it. It was just always being played in the house. So I was marinated in both traditional jazz and also uh, these later styles and kind of everything in between since I was a baby. And I am fascinated by all of that also. And like Simon, I mean, Simon um, plays many styles of music, and he's too modest maybe to mention all these other things that he does. And I'm also myself interested in all kinds of styles. And we happen to meet and spend most of our time together with this uh, New Orleans style. But yeah, it was my family, and then my schooling. I happened just by luck, my county that I went to school in had excellent funding for youth music programs. It was all free. It was all fantastic. I ended up going to conservatory in London to study classical music. I always played classical music, and but it all boils back to my parents. My mother was of the generation that went out in her late teens, aged 17, 18, was getting dressed up on a Saturday night to go and dance to a Dixieland jazz band. That was what was in vogue in London then. And my dad, similarly, that was his thing, although he was also into more kind of contemporary stuff.
So before we get into live at Birdland, I want to know in your life, what was one of the first live shows that you saw that blew you away or made you think, I want to be on that bandstand one day? That's what I want to do with my life.
Well, I've got one that just came immediately to mind, but there are many. And this came to mind, so I'm gonna tell you about it. I was about 9 years old, so it's pretty early on. My dad took me to see Oscar Peterson at the Albert Hall in Nottingham, not the Royal Albert Hall in London, but the Albert, and which is close to where I grew up. And it was scheduled as a solo piano concert, and we showed up, and there was a bass and a set of drums set up, and we looked at each other thinking, oh, we thought it was going to be solo, and it was Louis Bellson and John Hurd, and in my 9-year-old brain, this was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I barely started playing piano by then. I definitely started, but just a real beginner. I don't know that in that moment I said, "Oh, I want to be a musician," but I certainly said, "Wow, this is better than anything."
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
How about you, Simon?
Yeah. Um, Well, I mean, in Melbourne, there was this fantastic trombone player named Frank Trainer, and he had a band called the Jazz Preachers, and they used to do church dances. They made a few records, um, but they had a fantastic trumpet player. His name was Roger Bell, and he was the brother of the famous Graham Bell, Australian jazz pianist. And they used to play at a church hall near me, and I used to sneak out and ride my bike over, and I couldn't get in, but I'd stand outside and just listen to them, outside the glass window of the church hall, and and then when I was old enough, I'd go in and hear them. And I eventually ended up sitting in with them at the Frank Trainer. This guy had a club in Melbourne, and he was very supportive of young musicians. So if he saw you more than once, he would okay, you're good. What are you doing? And he was a great guy. So that was the fellowship and the sound and seeing how engaged and hearing how engaged all these guys were when they played just knocked me out. And later on I went to art school for 4 years, and it never kind of grabbed me like jazz did, although. So that's where I ended up.
So let's flash forward live at Birdland. You're playing in one of the most premier clubs on the planet. What was it like to record this album? What does it mean to you?
Oh, go.
Well, so many things to say. I mean, it was a thrill to get the gig. It was a thrill to play in there, and still is. And our drummer Kevin Dawn actually was already a regular recording artist on Turtle Bay Records. And I think it was Kevin that invited the CEO, Scott Asen, to come and see us. So he came to the club to watch a show, and he was knocked out with it. And it kind of reminded him of the good old days and all this great jazz, this New Orleans kind of stuff that you don't hear so much anymore. And he, right after the gig, right straight away said, we should record you guys. We got to record you guys. So, and it was his idea to do the live recording. And so we recorded 2 nights, 2 performances live, our regular Thursday night performances. And I think it's fair to say that everything we played, it was just a live concert. There was no retakes, no editing, no nothing. Everything we played came out usable. And we had 2 fantastic nights. And there's, I forget how many, is it 8 or so tracks on the album? But there's another 10 or 11 on the cutting room floor that's enough for another album. And we just had 2 great nights. And for me, it was absolute thrill to be performing in Birdland, to record in Birdland. And now we have this beautiful, I have it right here for your listeners to take a look.
Absolutely.
And it's so wonderful. It's hard to explain, but it's nice to get the product in your hand,
Uh-huh.
and there it is. And for your listeners, I don't know if they're aware, but there's a beautiful booklet that the great Ricky Riccardi wrote. He's a Grammy Award-winning liner note writer and book writer and all the rest. So all these various elements were part of the album, and all of it was kind of very thrilling.
Yeah.
Simon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was a thrill to get some of the classic material that we play that doesn't get played so often down on record. Some of the classic rags and waltzes and uh, habanera / tango kind of things that we play. Uh, we try and do every night. We try and fit them into the program on a regular basis, and so it was really nice to get that kind of variety onto the record.
So if anybody wants to catch you guys live, where's the best place to do that now? And even to pick up an album. If they want to get a copy of this beautiful album with the liners and everything in physical form, where's the best place to go?
Well,
Or
if sorry, go ahead, Simon.
isn't it band? What's it? Bandcamp, I think.
Bandcamp. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's the place they can get it.
Okay.
Or you can go to the Turtle Bay website and follow whatever directions are there. I'm not sure what they are. I haven't purchased one yet.
Yeah, Turtle Bay Records .com. I'm sure you can purchase directly from them. And if anyone's in the New York area, I think the best thing is come and see us. Come to a live show.
Yeah.
And we do sell the club sells the CD right there, and we'd be happy to sign it for anyone also, and meet and greet and all the rest of it.
Beautiful. Well, I will put all of those links in the show notes. Again, this has been absolutely wonderful. I've already played it on the show. I've had you guys on before. I interviewed one of the band members, Jerry
Zygmunt.
Yes, Jerry Zygmunt. I interviewed him a long time ago, and we had a wonderful time. Yeah, so yeah, it was good. So it's great. I'm eventually connecting all of the dots and interviewing everybody. So it's great to get you guys on Neon Jazz to talk about the album. So thank you so much, and best of luck with everything. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, John. It was a great pleasure.
Absolutely.